He looked at the man who was pacing nervously around the room. The physician took a while before initiating a dialogue. His palms were visibly sweating. It was apparent how long the doctor was fumbling with the medical card in his hands. The patient's diagnosis felt like a verdict, a death sentence.
Severe kidney disease. There is no treatment. You have a few months left.
He was walking down the hospital corridor, calm and confident. The country's chief security officer, who led the KGB for 15 years. He sent millions of innocent people to camps and psychiatric hospitals. And so he was discharged from the hospital, aware that he was nearing the end of his life. Yuri Andropov. He realized that from this moment, his life began to wind down. But he could do nothing.
Andropov's kidneys were gradually deteriorating. Since then, to sustain his life, he was compelled to undergo hemodialysis, or artificial blood purification, several times a week. This was one of the biggest secrets of the omnipotent KGB chief. He only had a few years left to live, and he dedicated these final, most valuable years of his life to his ruthless rise to the Soviet throne.
The secrets of the life of the most enigmatic general secretary of the USSR. He grew up in a wealthy Jewish family. However, the Soviet authorities executed his father and left him to perish on the street. He dreamed of a tranquil family life, but his own wife was spying on him for the NKVD. All his life, he had to conceal his true origins. And to escape from the system that turned him into a monster and destroyed his life. Father's death. 1917, Moscow. He was awakened by terrible screams, got up and ran.
I commanded, kneel down.
A bloodied father stood in the middle of the room. Scared, Gosha ran towards him. A shot was fired. Velv Lieberman fell hard to the floor.
Dad, wake up!
Gosha could not move. He was frantic, covering his ears with his hands, crying, pleading for it to stop. Gosha sat next to his father's body, frightened and alone. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't know what to do.
Gosha was only 3 years old when he witnessed the Jewish pogroms. It was 1917, and the October Revolution in Russia was still ongoing. The new Soviet government seized the Lieberman family's small jewelry store in the heart of Moscow. Yes, in a single day, the boy lost everything, his carefree childhood and hopes for a normal life.
A damaged student ID card. Nefernino Treditri, Rybinsk. Grigory was in a terrible rush. His fate was to be decided today. A few days ago, he passed the exam for the Rybinsk Technical School of Water Transport with flying colors. And now, he had to find out if the committee had accepted him for the first year. Grigory was anxious, searching for his last name in the lists. The small letters were blurry. IK. Here comes the letter L. Lazarev Lapov. Lieberman. He was ready to jump for joy.
He endured this for 10 long years, starving, working at railway stations, and sleeping in wagons. After his mother passed away, he had to look after himself. Upon entering the technical school, he knew that he would be provided with accommodation and a scholarship. Most importantly, he will acquire a viable profession, which means an opportunity to escape from poverty.
Modest and hesitant, Grigory never had faith in himself. But now, for the first time in many years, he held his shoulders high. If his mother had lived to see those days, she would have been proud of her son. All he had to do was pick up his student card, and his dream would come true.
Surname?
Lieberman.
Lieberman.
Grigory was unaware that while he was searching for his name in the lists, inquiries were being made about him outside the office door. When he entered, his fate was already sealed.
But I found my student card.
Indeed, after the revolution, many people of Jewish descent were present in the Soviet structures. Overall, it was evident, a significant portion of the Bolsheviks were Jews. But after Stalin's significant confrontations with Trotsky, Kamenev, Bukharin, and Zinoviev, it became evident that Stalin was progressively marginalizing the Jews. He perceived in them a sort of resistance to some of his decisions.
After that, the government bodies of the USSR received a clear directive. Proletarians should not discriminate against Jews. Yes, these people worked and lived, but they were not allowed to receive education or participate in political activities. Grigory was unaware of it. He will never forget this day. The man stepped into the hallway. He didn't know what to say. The young man walked gloomily, with his head down. A loud laugh echoed behind him.
Hit him.
He looked around in a daze. A student theater group was rehearsing in the hallway. Dressed as a tavern keeper, the man stooped and bowed deeply.
On your knees is not relevant to the sentence. The correct translation should be, I told you so.
They started beating him with a stick. This view sparked a flurry of emotions. The spectators gathered around enthusiastically applauded. And nobody noticed the reaction of the intoxicated young man who couldn't take his eyes off this spectacle. At that moment, Grigory realized that they would never leave him alone. And all due to the last name that turned into their family's curse. Mask replacement.
Andropov. Andropov.
An anxious whisper spread through the audience. The teacher was visibly nervous.
Is Andropov here?
Yes, I am.
Bring your grade book.
Damn surname. He couldn't get used to it.
You could do better.
Of course he could, but he wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Firstly, he was scared to stand out from the crowd, to avoid arousing suspicion.
Now he was just like everyone else. A diligent orphan, a genuine proletarian with basic knowledge and average skills. Like the other 50 students at the Rybinsk Technical School of Water Transportation. Now he had a truly Russian name, Yuri Andropov.
With his arms spread wide, he tracked the ball. Pass, one more. No one knew who was truly behind this name. Grigory Lieberman no longer exists. The day he was expelled from the technical school, he made the pivotal decision to obliterate all documents and traces of his background. He chose to die so as to be reborn as a different person.
It was the 1930s. The USSR had just begun issuing passports. They could be acquired in exchange for a specific certificate that indicates the place and date of birth, which also necessarily specifies the social status of the parents. He was unable to produce such a certificate, so he concocted an elaborate story that he was an orphan raised in an orphanage, which he claimed later burned down. Back in those days, this occurred quite frequently, and the man was trusted.
So Grigory Lieberman became Yuri Andropov. He adopted this surname from one of the factory workers in Saratov. After altering his documents, he returned to Rybinsk for the second time. After the repressions of 1933, the structure of the technical school underwent a complete transformation. So now nothing was stopping him from becoming a student again.
And he, for instance, quite effortlessly and swiftly, managed to convince everyone that he truly was Andropov. And his name is Yuri Volodymyrovich. All the subjects, all the questions about his origins, only began to emerge later, after his death.
After changing his name, he began to feel more confident. The shy, uncertain Gosha is gone forever. Now he was a ruffian, the life of the party and its leader. He genuinely believed that now nothing would prevent him from living peacefully. Yuri had a simple Soviet dream: to work, secure an apartment, get married, and have children. And everything seemed to be going smoothly until a woman entered the young man's life. In bed with the enemy. Neverdy Stordy, Yaroslavl. He looked out the beloved window, waiting for a familiar female figure to appear. Nina finally appeared. She raised her hands and showed him a small folded envelope. Yuri felt like the happiest person on earth.
He has your nose.
Today, his wife gave birth to a boy. This is their second child. 5 years have passed since they got married. Andropov had nothing to complain about. Despite detesting party work, he nevertheless did it for Nina's sake. She has been active in the community since her student days and has achieved significant success by dedicating herself to the common cause.
The young Andropov was promoted simply because he was more experienced. The generation of managers was completely devastated. In other words, the entire membership of the Yaroslavl Regional Party Committee was arrested, including the whole membership of the Yaroslavl Regional Komsomol Committee, Kosarev included, that is, all the Komsomol leaders. From the Central Committee of the Komsomol to the regional committees of the Komsomol. They were destroyed during the years of Stalinist terror. Hence, they scrutinized which among the youth was the most competent. Then everyone was quickly advancing in their careers, not just Andropov.
The role of secretary for the Yaroslavl Regional Committee did not bring him satisfaction, but it provided a good income. The Andropovs finally moved from a shared apartment to their own. Yuri's career was on the rise, until he knocked on the door of a small office.
Comrade Andropov is misleading the party. He intentionally conceals his last name. This means that he is an adversary of the people.
On that day, a special committee had to determine whether Comrade Andropov was deserving of becoming a member of the CPSU. He regarded it as a mere formality, unaware of the file the party had compiled on him.
He will not be sent to prison. At most, Andropov will be given a party ticket. The committee will consider the man's past achievements and decide to utilize him for the party's advantage. From that day forward, Andropov will be entrusted with the most challenging and perilous tasks. And he will not be able to resist, as he will become a captive of the system, which will turn him into a monster.
Issuing the party ticket was not a gesture of goodwill. It was advantageous for these individuals to have a party member like Andropov. They had incriminating material on him. It was the most effective method of influence. Of course, Andropov had a choice: to refuse and die as an enemy of the people. Alternatively, he could consent to move to the Karelo-Finnish Republic and become one of those he has despised his entire life. To become a defector, to assist the head of the Karelian Central Committee in purging the party's ranks. To surveil and report. He didn't want to do it, but there was no other choice.
In those days, people did not have the choice to decide their own future. No one, not from the party, the Komsomol, or even the state leaders, dictated their own career. Because you were a party member.
He tossed and turned in bed, quietly turning over so as not to wake his sleeping wife. Andropov couldn't sleep. He sifted through all the potential choices in his mind, dozens of names, and each time he returned to one. Nina worked for the NKVD for several years. Only she could tell the truth about his origins. He once told her about his parents and their cruel treatment. He gave his real name. No one else could know. Andropov was unwell. He was lying next to the woman he once loved more than anything else in the world, and he couldn't touch her. He couldn't be near her. That night he quietly packed his things and departed for Karelia. Alone, without uttering a word to his wife. Since then, the family has ceased to exist for him. Andropov will never see his children and Nina again. He will diligently carry out all party orders. Later, he will divorce his wife, who was unfaithful to him.
Andropov was undoubtedly a careerist at heart. Even back then, he foresaw his future and believed that he should have pursued an exceptional party career. He probably would not have divorced, as this factor would have overshadowed his political career. Divorce was neither desired nor encouraged. It was viewed as a sign of recklessness.
But he didn't care. Andropov complied, as he had learned his lesson well. Running and hiding is useless. This was the case with his parents. This is precisely what occurred during his unsuccessful attempt to gain admission to the college. And now it has happened again. His closest companion, his beloved wife, betrayed him. She introduced him to the party. He will adhere to the rules of the game and become an impeccable player. He will become part of the system that took everything from him. The killer. The year 1956. Budapest. Panic prevailed on the streets of Budapest. Thousands of people did not go to work. An armed, boisterous crowd assembled in the squares, ready to storm the Soviet embassy. It was a Hungarian protest against the Soviet regime. The Soviet government did not wish to vacate the territories they occupied following the conclusion of World War II. That day, the violent Hungarian uprising became a part of history. The former ambassador of the USSR, Yuri Andropov, was responsible for the suppression of this uprising.
Hungary experienced significant political developments that resulted in the formation of an opposition movement, which ultimately escalated into an uprising. Andropov was the center of attention for the Central Committee of the party and the Council of Ministers. In other words, the codes were sent to Moscow via the ambassador. The directives were relayed to the Hungarian communists through the ambassador. In other words, the ambassador and the embassy in Hungary became the hub of a tremendous amount of activity.
Let them laugh at the poet, and let them envy him twice as much. I write sonnets for my wife, not for someone else's.
These poetic lines were penned by a man who would soon summon Soviet tanks to the streets of Budapest. Under his command, people will be immediately suppressed without any prior warning. In that horrific carnage, hundreds of people will perish, thousands will be severely injured. Among them is the person to whom this poem was dedicated.
Tatiana made her way through the noisy crowd of protesters. The streets were packed with people. She was only thinking about one thing: Yuri. What will happen to him? They were married for 16 years and had 2 children. However, Tatiana had no idea about her husband's life before they met. She was unaware of his other family and divorce from his first wife. She was unaware of her husband's cherished secret. Andropov did not utter a single word about his true past. However, she loved him, and now she was terribly worried. Like a mad woman, she rushed towards him. If only she could have warned him in time. The embassy was already in sight. She rushed forward when she heard terrible, frantic screams. The crowd rushed towards her. And then Tatiana saw armed soldiers who were pointing machine guns directly at people. Shots were heard. Dozens of people fell to the ground. But the soldiers did not stop. Tatiana looked around in horror. She couldn't believe it. More than anything, she wanted it to end. But the machine gun did not stop firing.
On the streets, you could see state security officers who had been hanged and killed. It was indeed an explosion of public outrage. And of course, such views. Overall, this event will be etched in the memory of not only those with a fragile disposition, but also those with a robust one. That's why it's associated with triggering nervous conditions.
For the 3rd consecutive day, he sat beside her. Andropov watched with sorrow as Tatiana trembled in her sleep. One thought kept coming to mind. He is to blame for what happened. It was under his command that Soviet tanks started to run over people in the streets. Upon his command, they began firing with machine guns. The crowd lost control. Something needed to be done urgently. He didn't think that Tatiana would come to his aid. Andropov sincerely believed that his wife would stay at home, fearing to venture outside. But things turned out differently.
After the suppression of the Hungarian uprising, Andropov was promoted. He will be transferred to Moscow and appointed as the head of the Department for Socialist Countries in the USSR. But this victory will cost him his own family. Andropov's wife will never be able to recover from what she has endured. Only potent medications can soothe her, and from that day, she couldn't live without them.
Please.
Let me go! Let go! Let go!
Tatiana wept and struggled hysterically, demanding a new dose of medication. He pleaded to stop, but it didn't help. And then Andropov decided he will resign from his job, relinquish his positions, and devote his time to caring for his wife, who is not admitted to regular hospitals. He will rescue her from the dreadful disease she contracted because of him. A secret deal. The year 1964. Moscow. Andropov was sitting at the table, reviewing some documents. There was a knock at the door. A dignified, dark-haired man entered. They talked for more than an hour and quietly parted ways.
In a few days, the General Secretary of the USSR, Comrade Khrushchev, will be discreetly removed from his position. One of the active participants in the uprising was Yuri Andropov, a prominent member of the CPSU Central Committee at the time. Shortly thereafter, he will cast his vote for the new candidate at a party meeting. That day, he met in his office with Leonid Brezhnev, a prominent Soviet leader.
Soon after that, Andropov was named the head of the KGB. And his wife Tatiana will be moved to the most prestigious private Kremlin clinic. There, the top Soviet doctors will oversee her treatment. Only there will Tatiana feel better for the first time since the events in Hungary. And a grateful Andropov will thank the party for its support.
A separate department was established within the KGB, specifically tasked with handling dissidents. It is associated with religious institutions, specifically Jewish institutions. It is associated with people from the theater and other communities. Elements of the intelligence apparatus are starting to emerge everywhere. Information is flowing in. What are these people discussing in the kitchen and what are they engaged in? This generates some background information on Andropov.
He was sitting in his office, carefully reading documents. Altman, Allweis, Baer, Neutzmann, Ruge. Thousands of mostly Jewish surnames. These individuals will spend the rest of their lives in psychiatric institutions. Only one signature of his decides the fate of these prisoners. This is how the former Jewish boy, who is now the all-powerful head of the KGB, dealt with dissidents and enemies of the state. Lieberman came down hard on people like him.
Andropov, of course, started doing what the KGB and Khrushchev had done before him. People were imprisoned for expressing disagreement with the political activities of the Soviet government. That is, every year between 15 to 20,000 people underwent the so-called prevention. Sophisticated psychological and ethical pressure. This can be directly observed in the KGB's work statistics.
And yet he did not feel like a traitor. Andropov was certain that he was doing it for his wife. If he doesn't work for the party, Tatiana will be expelled from the Kremlin hospital and transferred to a standard psychiatric hospital. He was well versed in the methods used by the doctors there. In Soviet hospitals, drug addicts were not treated with much consideration. Andropov could not tolerate his wife being mistreated after the sorrow she had endured. He was ready to do everything to prevent this from happening.
He did not want to be the head of the punitive, a special organization. This was not in his plans. But he obeyed.
He picked up the phone and carefully dialed a familiar number. A pleasant female voice sounded on the other end of the line. Tatiana Andropova feels great. She is recovering and will be able to return home very soon. He jumped up like a lunatic. He needs to leave right now, to see her, to hug her. He quietly crept through the hospital corridors. She was lying on the bed and smiling blissfully. Yuri rushed to her, lifted her up, and embraced her. Tatiana did not seem to react. He gazed at his wife's face. She stared ahead with a glassy, frozen gaze. She had the same blissful smile on her face. Andropov understood everything. She did not recover. On the contrary, she was deteriorating. All this while, he was misled, being told that Tatiana was recuperating, to keep him employed, to do the undesirable tasks. Andropov started to feel unwell. He gripped the bed and clenched his teeth tightly to not give himself away. His hand slipped and he fell to the floor. Sentenced to death. He looked at the man who was nervously pacing the room. The physician took a while before initiating a discussion. His palms were visibly sweaty. He saw how long the doctor held the medical card in his hands. The patient's diagnosis seemed like a verdict.
Severe kidney disease. There is no treatment. You have a few months left.
He was walking down the hospital corridor, calm, confident. The country's chief KGB officer, who led the KGB for 15 years. He knew he was dying and couldn't do anything about it.
He realized that he was ill. He called the doctors and asked them frankly, "How many years do I have left to live?" After the diagnosis, he lived for only 13 or 14 months.
Andropov knew when the disease started. Many years ago, while serving in intelligence in Karelia, he was ambushed during the war. For 2 days, Andropov remained submerged up to his neck in mud, afraid to reveal his position. Subsequently, he was admitted to the hospital for a few weeks due to intense inflammation. I treated myself because I had a terrible dislike for doctors and never visited them. And now it was too late. Everything he fought for, everything he strived for, was in vain. He failed to save his wife, and now he has ruined his own life. For all these years, Andropov had to appease the system, but now it's over. There was nothing left to fear, nothing to lose, and therefore no need to pretend. Why work within the system when you can lead it? This thought was a lifeline, and the critically ill and shattered Andropov made a decision. He decided to become the Secretary General, to clear his path of obstacles without fear or remorse. For the first time, not for someone else, but for myself.
Andropov's health was clearly declining. The kidney disease was terrible. Undeniably, Andropov was headed towards a tragic demise.
He watched in fascination as the liquid slowly flowed down the drip. Now, twice a week, he has to sustain his health by undergoing dialysis on an artificial kidney machine. He could not give up. Not yet. The droplet hovered and rolled down the transparent tube. 1. Secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee, Grigory Romanov. 2 people will come to see him today. They will show him the document. The daughter of Romanov celebrated her wedding at the Hermitage. A drunken crowd caused significant havoc in the museum. Evidence of this has already been found. To prevent a scandal, Romanov will pen a resignation letter. Thus, the first candidate for the position of Secretary General will proceed. He examined the swollen veins. One by one, precious drops trickled down there. Secondly, Fyodor Kulikov, the youngest member of the Politburo and the second most probable candidate to succeed Brezhnev. This morning he was found dead at his country house. Cardiac arrest. He was writhing in pain, and the drops kept falling. Third, Army General Semen Zvihun is the third candidate. He was allegedly arrested for extortion. A trial was being arranged, but Zvihun, a relative of Leonid Brezhnev, would not wait for the hearing. He shot himself in his office. The last drop. He turned the knob on the IV drip. We just had to wait a little longer, and the throne would be vacant.
This is a chronicle of the parade at Red Square in 1982. On the podium, Leonid Brezhnev can hardly stand. 3 days later, he would pass away. However, this fact wouldn't surprise anyone. For several years, the entire world watched in horror as the Soviet Secretary General gradually deteriorated. But no one knew that another terminally ill man, Yuri Andropov, was standing next to him.
He assumed the position of Secretary General, knowing that he had very little time left to live. This thought drove him mad. It seemed that now there was nothing left to wish for, nothing left to strive for. The path to power, for which he had strived, was finally over. What was left to do now? Only emptiness and these dreadful hospital wards that became his workplace.
There were numerous ideas and plans, and many projects were initiated. Many hopes were raised. But there were very few substantial changes. The battle against corruption, the struggle for discipline. In other words, I had to be punctual for work and meet all the obligations. Raids were carried out in bathhouses, lines at stores were raided, and documents were inspected. In other words, there were numerous intentions and plans, and there was significant interest in Andropov.
All his endeavors were in vain. Andropov's illness worsened. The 15 months of his reign over the USSR will resemble a horrific death agony. He will only be able to move around with the assistance of guards. Andropov will undergo dialysis twice a day. The former KGB chief will govern the country from his hospital bed. Lonely, abandoned. He was the last and most dreadful victim of the system. His own life,